Hello, listening people.
Hello.
Hello, Bartek. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Ryan. How are you doing?
I am doing spectacular. I am doing so fantastically because I'm here with you.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot, actually.
No
wow.
jokes, no irony. Just
Yeah.
happy to be with my friend Bartek.
Yeah. You know what? I'll take your word for it, but I want to ask a random woodcutter what he thinks.
You want to get a different perspective on the matter?
Yeah, I want to really know what other people think you're feeling right now.
Okay, we'll have to find out. One of them will involve possession, but...
Well, channeling.
Channeling. Let's get it right. I've got to get the chi in. Now, Bartek, we have something very important to let everyone know about, which is the name of the podcast. We're called Spit and Polish, likingly, because we're always spitting, and we both happen to be Polish. And as we record this, the Olympics are still making their way. And have Poland done any better since last time we talked about the Olympics? Have you heard any updates?
I think there might be a gold medal.
A gold medal? You don't know?
Yeah.
For what? What did they win it for?
I think it was a female athlete, and it might have been for like climbing or something.
Climbing. You wanna take a guess at that? I'm not too sure. I thought you would know. Come on, Mister.
I think I heard it.
Speed climbing is the thing that they won a gold medal in.
Oh, cool!
Speed climbing, and Australia embarrasses itself at breakdancing, but that's a whole different conversation.
I didn't know breakdancing was Olympics.
Oh, it was, and now it's not.
Okay.
It won't be returning. This is a true fact. After this, we'll look up the infamous clip and have a good chuckle. But for the time being, we are here to talk about movies that come recommended, whether it is from yourself, from myself, or the listening people out there. And who recommended the film this time, and what film was given to us?
Well, the person who recommended it is raising their hand right now.
Listening people.
And that's no. We're not going to say who it is.
Okay.
But they're raising their hand right now. Let me just put my hand down for now.
How long could you keep your hand up?
As long as Goku needs.
Okay.
That's a reference to something.
Is it a reference to Dragon Ball?
Yeah.
Because that has a Goku in it.
Yeah.
Is there a specific arc of Dragon Ball where Goku needs your hand up?
Was that what people had to do for the spirit bomb, or did they just have to believe?
Or did they have to be like Anne Frank and be a believer? That's a Justin Bieber.
I'm giggling because I remember there was a show once on a great website called Channel Awesome, that guy with the glasses, where a guy would read out bad fan fictions, and I think literally the second episode was a slash fic between Goku and Anne Frank.
There you go. And of course, is it like Oni Plays where they did Nostalgia Critic reads out a review of The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, and it becomes a conversation about Anne Frank?
It becomes Goku fighting Hitler.
There you go. But we are here to talk about a film actually recommended by you, Bartek.
Yeah, it was me. Hence I put the hand down.
You downed your hand.
Down, baby, down.
You down, baby. And
prices are down.
Okay, Bartek is recommending prices are down.
I recommend... Wait, is that Woolworths or Coles?
That's Coles, I'm pretty sure.
I recommend Coles.
the good establishment of Coles. You can buy food there.
Yeah. I'm more of a Woolworths person, but I recommend Coles.
Woolworths are the fresh food people. And Coles?
Prices are down.
Prices are down.
No, I recommended the 1950 Japanese film Rashomon.
Directed by...
Akira Kurosawa.
The iconic filmmaker, seminal, important filmmaker, groundbreaking, and a changer of how cinema was made. This is our first time doing one of his movies on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
See, we do the big films. We don't just do Big Fat Liar, which is a bigger film, because it has big in the title, but we do things like Rashomon, which...
Could we call it Big Rashomon?
Could we call it Big Fat Rashomon?
It's got a very big gate.
Who would Paul Giamatti play in this? And why is it the husband? I know you want to say the bandit, but he would be the husband.
I could either see him as the bandit or the commoner who, steals the kimono at the end.
Oh, interesting.
Maybe.
See, I see him as the husband doing his performance from, as Mr. X in the great film The Nanny Diaries, where he's like a stoic weirdo who you have a hard time reading. But we're doing Rashomon, which is how would you even go about describing this to someone? In a way, it's pretty well known. When you even say what it is and how it goes about it, people have seen a version of this.
Yeah, whether you know it or not, it is iconic enough to the point that the title is used in our English language lexicon to refer to specific types of storytelling. The specific type being a story told, the same story told from multiple perspectives and seeing like the differences between them. You call that like Rashomon storytelling, and there's also the Rashomon effect, which that one slipped my mind right now, but yeah, Rashomon effect, getting, I guess, also different sides of a story.
Yeah, and so we are now going to talk about this film. So if you have not watched it for yourself, give it a watch. It's there. It's freely available.
It's public domain, so, you know, even if you don't shell out money to watch it, who cares?
Give it a go and then come back and hear our thoughts on this film. And I'll go through my relationship and history with it first because it's not too complicated. I've never seen this before. It's always been on the watch list. It's always been something to check out on my part, but it just has never happened. And I must admit, I've only seen 1 or 2 films from this filmmaker in the past, and now I've added another one to his catalog here. And I'm keen to give some more of his films a watch because with the minute amount I have seen, there are recurring imageries and motifs and actors and just that style that I could recognize and go, oh, here it is. And I get a kick out of that, as do you, when you go through a filmmaker's filmography and you can see the DNA that carries from film to film to film to film, whether it is they love this actor or they love this piece of iconography or they love setting a film in this period an idea. Yeah. And I very much was drawn to that. But I haven't seen this before. I had an idea of what to expect just because this is such a well-known film and its storytelling type has gone on to be replicated and used, and you could even say abused for decades to come. But I was still surprised when I actually sat down and watched it because the Rashomon-style storytelling that I expected this to be was different than how I expected it to be. Like a lot of the time, the versions that I see of this are the same incident, like, and this is true to this, but like there is some version of the truth in each one of them, but it's like each person telling the story has a different angle on what the truth is. And this version of it has that a bit, but it kind of just feels like everyone, like, I don't know how to, like, we'll describe it more as we get into it, but it's not as simple as that way of doing it, especially because a lot of the stories kind of muddle over the top of each other. I was expecting this to be a lot more segmented than it was.
You would imagine like every single version of the story would be like the same length and covering the same general beats, but they kind of go in sort of different directions. Like the first one is the longest one, which, you know, kind of sets the stage, and then the rest of them focus on like a specific aspect of like the latter half of that original story.
And it's interesting too because it's people telling stories about people who told stories of a story being told, and so there's extra degrees of separation.
Most of them are secondary accounts,
and that's a huge difference. But yeah, I often expect like versions of this to have like, here's the story that you understand. In this case, it's about a man who's been murdered, and here are the key players of this story. Usually it's the 3 people, the bandit, the wife, and the husband who got murdered. And there's always one element that's true in each one of them, no matter what. And this doesn't have that fully, other than like, these people were there.
Well, you have to point out that in the end you don't get the answer, so it could still be the case that there is elements of truth in all of them.
Exactly. And that often happens too with Rashomon stories, is sometimes you still don't get the answer. You just have the fun of watching this was the comedic version of what could have happened, and this is the very biased version of what could have happened, and and again, these are all still relevant to this one in a way, but the way that it was presented and executed and the pacing of it and the way that they overlapped and the amount of storytelling on storytelling on storytelling, still took me by pleasant surprise. So I want to just say that this was not a victim for me of time has marched on, and the classic and the influence that this has been tarnished because we've had so many things come after it that take from it. That was not the case for me when I watched it last night. Now, you recommended this, so why did you recommend this? Have you seen this before? Tell us your experiences with it.
Yes, so this is the only Kurosawa film I have seen, so now I've seen it twice. Definitely got to check out more of his stuff. I watched it a couple of years ago. I think when I watched it then, I'd only recently, for the first time, heard the phrase Rashomon. I think I heard it in some other context of it being used, and then finding out, like, oh, there was a film, made with this title, and it is the thing that, codified this type of storytelling. I thought, like, oh, that's interesting, and I actually ended up checking out very soon after learning that, because it was freely available on YouTube. Checked it out, and I, like you said, I had a really pleasant time with it. Really enjoyed its storytelling, really enjoyed how, as simple as its execution was, it really did leave me thinking for quite a while. I think I was talking to Reese about it, our friend Reese, not long after I watched it, and I think he ended up watching it as well. We ended up sharing some ideas about it. I'm not 100% sure if that actually happened. I'll have to get his take on it, I guess.
Yep.
But I remember not long after finishing watching it, I kind of pieced together my own theory in my head, which it's kind of slipped my mind. I think I have it back, but not quite sure yet. But yeah, just one that I'd always thought about and definitely knew I'd recommend it eventually on the podcast. And that's why we're here today.
There you go. Now, Kurosawa films, from what I have seen, one I would really recommend for you. I think you would get a kick out of it. I have a copy of it that you can borrow if you so chose. I don't want to do it on the podcast because it's so long and huge, but there's his 1985 film Ran, and that one's like about medieval Japan and the kind of transitionary point, and it's an adaptation of King Lear.
Yeah, I remember when you watched Millennium Actress, you said that you saw the Ran segments of that.
Yeah, and that's a great film, and I bring that up because the first thing that caught my eye with Rashomon is the name Rashomon. Where does that come from? What is Rashomon? Because before viewing it, I never even thought about what was the name in the context of the film it comes from. I'm just so used to what it now means in our lexicon, as you said.
Yeah.
But what is Rashomon in the confines of the movie?
Yeah, it refers to the gate that is the setting where the modern day characters are discussing it. And I think the structure of the word is like Rasho means citadel and Mon means gate. So it's like the citadel gate.
And they are sitting in the charred remains, ruinous remains of this great place. And, they're having this discussion as they're staying underneath shelter while it heavily rains. And what caught my eye is that type of imagery, especially this big, huge set, is something that I've seen recur in his movies. As soon as it opened up and there they are underneath this, what looks like a charred out big place, I'm like, oh yeah, I've seen that in this guy's movies before. Usually I see them have it be pristine and nice and then actually set it on fire like they do
it's an iconic period piece setting because especially in like the war stories set in these Jidaigeki period pieces, you would have, like, defend the gate, because if they get through that, then that's, one bad thing that happens to us in the battle. If you protect the gate, that's going to be one big advantage we have.
But I thoroughly enjoyed this. I had a great time with it. The actual storytelling and the acting stuff, I did very much appreciate, but I was really gravitating towards the technicals of the movie. I thought it looked great. I thought the cinematography was really well handled and still fresh today. The music was wonderful. I really loved a lot of the themes that they had here. Very much worked well when they emphasized it in the first half. They emphasized the music. Each time you get a story, you're going to get the music. And then there's a sequence of events where we watch a fight play out and there's no music. It's just sounds of them scrambling around with the leaves and the branches and swords getting stuck in dirt. And it was very effective because the film really utilized sound and the type of noises we would hear and the type of melodies and music and the narration. And then there comes a point in one of the stories where all of that's stripped away because that's what it's about. It's about the bare bones reality of like they tried to kill each other.
Yeah, here's the raw events.
There's no flourishes. Like that's the one where the fight is really awkward and not romantic and not glorified. And it's just really like mundane and awkward. And I really like the technicals of this, this like the way shots were composed and the heightened acting style worked well for this, especially with the bandit character, the way that he performed in each version, especially his own version of the story or like his version. And just, you can tell, even if you haven't seen his other movies, that this director loves this actor. He does. That's one of the trivia points. He loved working with this actor.
Yeah, Toshiro Mifune. Yeah,
and he's been in a bunch of things, and you can just tell by how the camera lingers on him that this is someone who's made for movies. This is a face. This is a body. This is a voice that needs to be captured. And
yeah,
I just appreciated that.
I haven't seen too much of him, but I know that he was big in Hollywood as well.
Yes. He did some Hollywood movies here and there, but. He's just got one of those faces, especially as this bandit character. He's pulling these big expressions. And yet, for my sensibilities, I never felt like, oh, this is a bad performance because it's over the top. It works in the context of what this is going for.
And even the fact that he's the only character with a name, the fact that, he keeps saying his name adds to that, like, boastful nature of his.
Yeah, that's an interesting fact, too, that no character gets a name except for him, the perpetrator.
Yeah.
Everyone else is just their title or their status or their job. Husband, wife, woodcutter, those type of things. And yet the murderer, the bandit, he's the one that's remembered by everyone, and he's the guy with the name. He's the guy with the personality.
I'm a little embarrassed that it slipped my mind. It's Jiro something.
Yeah. But how did you go on this revisit? How was it to come back to Rashomon after all of this time?
Yeah, I only really remembered like the broad strokes of the story where it was, there was the couple and then the instigator of the incident. I didn't quite remember the full context of like the framing device. I remember that, I remember the setting of the gate and the heavy rain, but didn't quite remember all the details there. I really found that stuff effective this time round. That rain that they did, the effect was, it made it seem really heavy.
Mm-hmm.
It really complemented the fact that, the two main guys who are recounting the entire tale, are having a crisis of conscience in humanity. And you can see that the rain really represents that. And I remembered that one of them would end up telling like the final tale. And it was interesting how that crisis of conscience with humanity ended up manifesting in that character's, realization of like, oh my God, even I've, omitted details and told a lie.
Yeah.
I found all that very effective.
Yeah, it's very effective. And you're talking about the rain, the symbolism of it all, the use of weather in the framing device as well as the story itself, because in the story itself that they're telling, this horrific incident that happened, no matter which way it plays out, it's still a murder and a death. It's this beautiful, sunny, nice day in the woods, very gorgeous, and we cut to them in the modern times, and it's this horrific weather that is just keeping them trapped in this one location. And I found it very... This is the fine balance of having something that's very stagey and something that's very cinematic.
Mm-hmm.
Because the film is very cinematic. It has lots of interesting camera moves, like I said, but there's a very stage-like quality to all of this. These confined locations, these very much kind of traits that you would use in the theater. For instance, when we have the stories being told and like at the throughout, We have the characters on their knees and they're facing the camera and they're like talking and there's no response we can hear.
Oh, when they're giving testimonies.
Yeah, when they're giving testimonies.
Yeah.
And yet we don't hear anything, but they're reacting like they're being talked to. And then they nod. That's theater. That's theater 101.
That was very theater.
And it added to the surrealism, like the kind of strangeness of the movie.
Yeah, they were even doing the thing where, like, they were basically repeating what was being asked of them. Like, oh, you want to know what happened now? Okay, this happened.
And you don't need to do that in a film, even in this time period and this filmmaker, but it's done anyway. And I think it just reinforces the weird narrative emphasis that they're going for. And for me, it was that fine balance. I think they got it just right of there is a stage quality to this film, but also a very cinematic quality to this. There's never a point where I'm watching this wondering, why is this a movie and not a stage play? Because
we've had that a couple of times on Pictures Powwow.
We've had that a couple of times, but there's just a lot to take in from just the technicals to walk away from and say, nah, you need that to be what it is currently.
Even with the gate setting, they kind of had that weird like theatrical quality where like they're mostly at the front. This is our stage, but then at the end they find something like that's kind of behind the gate, and it's kind of like you've suddenly gone to like another section of this very confined space that they're in,
and it really throws you for a loop because you're like, oh yeah, it's a movie. We can actually go around the corner.
Yeah.
They haven't done that with this really. And when they do that, it's like characters that exit stage left. It's like, we can actually go there too, by the way. And it's beautiful stuff. Just going on those technicals, I imagine, I'm not too sure if you read some of the trivia.
Well, a little bit of it, yeah.
There's just a lot of things to take in. For instance, that having not seen this movie before, this may be obvious to people who know it, but this is stuff that I wasn't really aware of. But like, this is one of the reasons we have the best foreign picture for the Academy, because they're it's just too good not to be recognized.
Yeah, a lot of the trivia was talking about just how, it changed everything.
The one that, talking about the rain, I really like the information about, because it's in black and white, because there's so much of a, like, minimalist background to lots of things, to make the rain stand out was very difficult because it's all grey. It all just blends together. So they just dyed the water and it's just basically ink. So they just made the water into ink. So that's why in one of the final shots, one of the characters gets a little bit of water, a little bit of rain on their face, and it's like a black ink dot because, that's what it is. So it's like, that's how you have to go about it, because you and I know from just having talked about movies and worked on stuff, movie rain is different to real rain. It has to be thicker. It has to be more viscous to show up on the lens.
Yeah, it has to be darkened.
And in a black and white movie, you have to think about how does it show up. And with a lot of black and white productions, costumes and sets and all that have to be very much thought about with color. Like if you've ever seen The Addams Family, the TV show.
Yeah, I saw a couple of episodes.
If you ever look at the behind-the-scenes stills of what their actual house looks like in color, it's really bright, really colorful because it's got to show up on the lens.
Okay, yeah.
And yet it looks gothic. But if you look at it, it's like bright pinks and yellows, but it has to show up. It's always strange when you look at black and white films and then you see the production stills in color and you're like, oh, that's what it looks like in color. Interesting.
I got to look that up, yeah.
But one thing that was fascinating to learn was this is thought to be one of the first films to point the camera directly at the sun.
Yeah, there was a trivia point about that.
And then there was a bickering of who came up with that idea. And Kurosawa was still bitter to this day. The head of the studio said it was his idea. I was like, okay. But that's something you would... 1950. Cinema's been around for a while at that point. And for apparently in 1950, this to be one of the first films to be like, what happens if we point the camera up at the sun?
Yeah, you'd think like a vampire film would have tried it or something.
And there's a lot of handheld in this movie too. A lot of people, the camera's following around. It's not dolly shots.
Especially in the woodcutter when he's walking through the woods at the beginning.
And the fight scenes where the camera has to kind of keep up with them. Although standard for nowadays impressive for for this time and what the story is trying to achieve. Because again, you could just make it cameras on tripod, shot, reverse shot, done, move on. But I think it would add to the staginess if you did it more traditionally.
Yeah.
But what do you want to talk about? I've been yabbering on about what I like about it on those visuals.
Well, just to expand from what you were talking about with the rain, it was also interesting the trivia pointed out that they also had trouble with the actual sunlight in a lot of those wood scenes because it was just too covered up and they had to use like intricate mirrors to light everything. And while watching the film, like I obviously didn't know any of that at all. Just like, oh, this is all very well lit, but to know that like, you know, they went through hell and high water to light everything just right. It's really impressive to think about.
And then they had to deal with slugs.
Yeah, that was also...
kept falling out of the trees onto everyone so they had to cover themselves in salt.
Sounds a bit nightmarish, yeah.
Yeah, and yet when you look at the film with what they're doing, it seems like it would be more simple in a weird way. But that's the reality of making a production. There's always issues. There's always obstacles to overcome. It makes me think of One Cut of the Dead, in which that's a movie about making movies and like all of these weird things you have to kind of figure out, problem solving.
Yeah, like you said earlier, it's just a nice sunny day, but they had to work very hard to make it that way.
Yeah.
They didn't just need it to be daytime. So we've talked about a lot of the film, except for, I guess, the 4 stories that have been told, which, so the general gist of the events that happened, I guess we'll establish that just to set things in stone for future discussion. A husband and a wife, a beautiful wife and a samurai husband, traveling through the woods somewhere, and a notorious bandit sees them, falls for the wife, and lures the husband into a trap where he ties him up, and then when he brings the wife over, he sexually assaults her, straight up rape. And then the 4 stories kind of vary in what happened next. It seems to be varying from the husband and the bandit fight over, which person who has slept with the wife will live, because 2 people having slept with one woman is worse than death. No at that time period.
And she would be ashamed if more than one person knew.
Yeah, and the murder victim in the whole case is the husband. So either way, the husband dies in some way, whether it's from a fight, whether it's from suicide in his story, or the possibility that the wife killed him in her story.
Or made it so that he would die.
Yeah.
Orchestrated it much more than just grief-stricken, one of you much more of a manipulator.
Yeah, basically when they all come together in that second time is when the story starts getting muddled.
We actually begin with the woodcutter's story of having found the body.
Yeah.
And I really liked that too, because I knew the subject matter was going to be about a murder and these different people telling their stories. But you start it and you have his jaunty little it was a nice day and I'm having a great time, and yet there's this dramatic underpinning to it all, because you know what it's going to lead to in some way, shape or form is grisly. And probably the most like haunting shot to me, weirdly, was when he discovered the body and we get that low down shot pointing up at the woodcutter's shocked reaction, and you have just these stiff hands just up in the air and the death throes, and it's just very unsettling. It's just a very unsettling image. It just hits you in the face with that, and I just found that just one of those things where you can tell that was an image in someone's brain that they said, I've got to put that on film somehow. And it's something that I could see other filmmakers having used or done versions of in other movies, but that stark lighting, the angle of it all, and just what led to it was just so happy-go-lucky. Oh, what's this? Oh, I found this. And oh, okay. And then, oh my God, it's a body. And the way that they presented it was very dramatic, but effective nonetheless.
Yeah, he runs away scared. He drops his hatchet and yeah.
And I like how at the start of his story, he's a tough man. Like I've got I've got a big axe, and then he's running away, throwing all of his things away, screaming in fear. And then in his story, when he's actually testifying and giving his side, he's whimpering and like blobbing a bit about like this horrific thing he's stumbled across, but also bitching about the bureaucracy of it all. That's something I really appreciate about this whole entire thing, was this minor bitch about like the justice system and bureaucracy, and like, yeah, so it took like the police this many days to actually bother to do anything about it. And it's just like
the framing device is like 3 days after the incident, I think.
Yeah. And there's just this general sense of animosity about how this is all going. Like, this guy had to go capture this guy, but the police didn't do it. It's just some random dude. Like,
yeah,
you did
I forgot
it. Like,
about that. Yeah,
and then the bandit's like, I didn't fall off the horse. Fuck you. And it's just
Jiromaru doesn't fall off the horse.
There was just
he drank poisoned water and he was
apparently
on the ground.
And then you had a hard cut of him drinking water like an animal. And there was a lot of comedy, like a comedy of errors and kind of weird little underpinning of like bureaucracy sure does suck, and yet it moves away from that very quickly. But in that, like in the testimony scenes where we had these characters, you were like, oh, they're going to be the ones telling the stories. Like I thought, oh, the 4 stories will be like the woodcutter, the bandit, but then it goes in different directions to that because you have the framing device still. But that's what I mean. There was just these different wrinkles to it that left me a bit interested in it more than what I was coming into it. I had a certain expectation walking in, and then when actually sitting there and watching, I'm like, oh, okay. Well, okay, this is how we're playing the story out. Oh, interesting.
Yeah. It's and they even had like the supernatural angle of like, we'll get a spirit channeler to channel the spirit of the victim who'll tell his side of the story.
Which is so fascinating. Like, how much do you believe it?
Yeah, it's a weird one where it's like, oh, this film has a supernatural aspect to it, but it's not really the point of the film. It's just part of the storytelling.
And how much do you believe that the supernatural is a real thing in it?
Yeah.
Because the film also shrugs at it at times where it's like, they got someone to do that. Like, I really like the kind of mundane way that they go about some of these stories, or like how they react to some of these stories, and then the very dramatic, like, oh my God, what have we done? Telling the story with this bias to it type of angle. So you want to walk us through the different tales, and we'll go through and talk about our reactions to them. So you said the first one was kind of the longest one.
Yeah, it's the longest one because it's the one that establishes like the before, and it also is telling us it's the only one delving into the mind of the bandit, because he recounts seeing the couple first off, the scheme in which he got the husband to fall for his trap, and then his take on the incident that everyone's going to give their take on. Yeah, and he's introduced, like you said, very comedically, in the sense that like he's boasting about how great he is. He's too great to simply fall off his horse. It must have been poison or something like that. And he's got all these like weird qualities, like he's very underdressed, he's always scratching himself. He's very animalistic, and I think in the trivia it was pointed out that Akira Kurosawa asked him to, base himself off of certain animals, I think like lions and stuff like that.
Every negative trait he describes as a noble thing that is actually good, such as him just sleeping and being stumbled across by a samurai. He's like, oh, I wasn't just sleeping on the job there. Like, I was being calculating. And then you see the performance change once that started being the telling of it. Like, when we first saw it, he kind of looks like just a slob sitting there. But then once we get that angle to it, now he's all menacing and calculating, and it's like he's camouflaged in the tree, and it's like...
And a fun aspect to think about his story, looking back after you hear all of them, is that he portrays everyone like the best. Like, the samurai is a noble person who will fight for his wife. The wife has the determination to try fighting back, and of course he, the bandit, is just the greatest person ever.
And everyone loves him. In the end, she did appreciate what I did to her. Like, she dropped the knife and she loved it. Like, gross, terrible person, but
Yeah.
in his worldview, this was a romantic event that happened, a noble event destined almost to happen,
Yeah,
and he's proud.
and in his testimonial scenes and in also his story, he constantly has this laugh that he keeps doing, like ha ha ha. Ha.
Kicking all the time.
And he has this move that he only does in his story, where like sometimes he'll like act like, all right, this fight is over, and he'll turn around to walk away, and then turn around, keep
run
fighting.
away. Yeah,
it's like, oh, I'm a master of fainting.
yeah. There's times where it's like, oh, he's run away now. Oh no, he's back just to do some havoc again. His was confronting, it was a confronting tale still. Like there's a lot of humor and vibrancy because the character is so over the top, but what he does is a horrific thing, especially to the wife. But then, because he's telling that story, he portrays the wife as like a trophy that was won. And so when we get the other versions from about her, it really, really draws you in on an emotional level, because you reject that from the very beginning. Like that first story with that bit in particular, you reject it. You're like, no, okay, like you're a piece of shit. Like,
yeah, you're obviously building yourself up, so how can we trust everything else?
Yeah, exactly. So when we get other versions where it's like, no, the wife, was a manipulator, or she really was a truly a victim of circumstances. It's like you're humanizing her character, who in the first story was not humanized. She was just an item.
Yeah.
For this bandit to get. This bandit who's like, I'll track her down and lure her into the trap. That's all she was. She's like a thing in his narrative, but then in all the other ones, she's like an active player in the story. And I was curious of like, are they going to do that? And they did that, because like in his first story, it's like, oh yeah, and the wife, his hots for her, blah, blah, blah. And then we get versions of the story afterwards where she's far more of a point of contention for everyone else.
In her one, like she's playing up the victim angle. In the husband one, she's a bit more standoffish. And then in the woodcutter one, it's kind of the opposite of the bandit, where all of them are portrayed as being like the negative versions of themselves.
There is no redeeming factor to them. So that was the first story. Anything else you want to say about the bandits? His version of events?
I liked that he would always, to build himself up, obviously, point out his moral code of like, I could have killed him to get the wife, but I thought it would be better if I could somehow not kill him and get the wife. That would be much better. And he emphasized that multiple times, and then eventually got to the climax where it's like, okay, but I had to fight him to the death.
I had to do it. Then there's the second story.
That's the wife's story. And this one focuses mostly on... for one thing, this is the first of two stories where the fight between the two men doesn't happen. This one focuses on the aftermath of the sexual assault. The bandit simply leaves. He doesn't kill the husband. And it focuses on the wife in her despair. She's crying. She goes to her husband for comfort. And she is met with eyes not of rage or despair, but of loathing. She's seeing herself being judged for what has happened to her. She is now a woman who has slept with more than one man, and it seems like the husband, who doesn't say a single thing, is just completely loathing of her. And it leads her to such a mental state of despair that she grabs her knife. She's, I think, repeating like, don't. And then she blacks out. And when she wakes up, her husband's dead. So the cause of death in this one's more vague.
She frames it as like, oh, kill me if you must.
Yeah. And then
don't judge me.
Yeah. And then she tries to drown herself.
This is very heavy, of course. And you know it from the beginning, too. The way that she gives her testimony and that the camera is so close to her physically as she gives the story. And it's very intimate. It's very quiet. Hence, the husband doesn't say anything. It doesn't need any dialogue for that. It's just... the dynamic is so well portrayed, and it's just so uncomfortable and sad, and it's probably the most emotionally resonant version of the story we get,
Mm.
which makes sense, of course, but how much of it do you take as her word for it? Even before you get the other versions of the story, before you get other things going on, the blacking out part of it, he's dead somehow. Oh, what went wrong here? And it's still something to chew on, especially because then we get the other two stories, which are far less kind to her, or at least give her a bit more of a ownership of what went wrong here
Yeah.
than
And
those first two stories, where the first one's like she was just there,
mm.
and then this one where she's like, I had no choice.
And even it being the nature of it being the second story, this is where the differences start to show themselves. Like, it deviates quite a bit from, like, the broad strokes of the first story. Like, the fight doesn't happen. The bandit simply leaves. This is the story where the bandit has the least going on.
Mm-hmm.
Because, once he leaves, he's gone. In the other two stories, the fight either happens or he comes back for something.
The actor who plays the husband is someone to commend as well, because he has to play drastically different versions in pretty much most stories. Everyone else, like the wife and the bandit, in each version of the story, there's kind of like a baseline where you can kind of go like, yeah, this is kind of who they are in each one that remains true. But the husband, he's the character, the person who's been killed, is portrayed very differently in each story. And the actor has to live up to that. And I really thought he nailed it in this second one because I fucking detested him. I was like, you piece of shit. Like the way she described the look is exactly what the actor was giving in that scene. Like, oh, that's the look. And so when we do get him in like the other stories and they're humanizing him and they're giving him these layers, I felt conflicted because I had such a reaction to him in the second story.
Yeah, I remember when you first get that shot of his eyes, it's like, ooh, what is going on here? And really, when she put it into words, it's like, yeah, that's what that look is.
She articulated what we could feel.
He's not feeling empty. It's loathing. Yeah,
Mm.
the first story is the one where he's portrayed the most heroically because he's like he's a serious samurai character in all of them, but in that one, where you get the first interactions with the bandit, he's like, trying to stand in his way with his wife, like, what are you doing? Questioning him. You walk ahead of me. And then, the fight was an amazing fight where we crossed sword 23 times. No one's ever crossed swords more than 20 times with me.
Mm-hmm.
And then, immediate shift to the second story where it's just no dialogue, barely any movement, just that look.
No glory, no action, no real understanding of the ultimate fate here. No one, in her story, there is no one taking credit for the death. It's something that happened. And that's interesting. Like, she's not saying, oh, yeah, it was the bandit that did it, which is, if you're thinking of she is guilty of this in some way or she committed the crime, it's interesting in her version, she doesn't particularly pin it on anyone in particular. Which is...
Yeah, but given the circumstance of the story, it almost pins it on herself the most.
Yes, and there's implications.
Yeah.
There's implications of events.
And we should also point out that in both this story, the first one and the third one, it's established that she has a knife with a pearl inlet or something like that.
Yes. So the third story, you want to start us off on that?
Yep, so this is the one that we mentioned before, has the supernatural element. The husband is the murder victim, and they have a lady spirit channeler who channels his spirit and tells his side of the story. And it starts, the same spot, post-sexual assault, and the husband, it mostly focuses on his despair at having been betrayed by his wife, and also, what has happened to his wife at first off. This is one that I forget the details of the most, so correct me if I'm wrong, but the bandit or the wife, one of them just frees him from the ropes, and the bandit wanders off, and the wife, what does the wife say to him?
The wife?
Yeah, I'm forgetting the details of this one for some reason.
Oh, interesting. So
I remember she's portrayed negatively, and
she's guilting.
Yeah,
she kind of gives the sense of like, this shouldn't have happened, why couldn't you have been stronger type aspects to this.
Yeah, she's pinning it on him.
Given the like, well, you have to kill him. Like, somebody has to die. Like, this emphasis of what the first story told of like, well, I can't live with the shame of this. Somebody, one of us, but this one's like, no, somebody has to die
Mm.
here. So let's sort this out. And I might be muddling that with the last story too, because the last story also does not portray her very positively. But
Yeah.
in as this,
Well,
as,
3 out of the 4 stories has the whole angle of like someone has to die.
yes, and this one, like, there's a degree of like with each one of them, like these last two of like, how much are they saying it's her fault, and how much are they saying, well, she kind of pushed things to this degree, but
Mm.
it wasn't her fault type aspect. And yes, this is the one where the husband goes through that he was so heartbroken over the events that he killed himself.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a lot to take in as well. That this one is much more about him as a character.
Yeah. The detail that I'm remembering is like the wife leaves at some point and the bandit comes back and tells him something and the bandit's like sympathetic to him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
Yeah.
there's just this melancholy in the air, and it is fascinating because we get to spend time with the husband. We get to get a moment of who this person was, but at the same time, how much are you believing that this is actually the husband telling his story to you, the viewer? Like, yes, do you believe that? Like, do you take it on face value, the supernatural, fantastical element? Do you take the spirit channeling, like we're talking to the dead here, as a given? Do you?
I think just for the sake of the story, I accept it.
There's a cinematic trick. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the person who's doing the channeling, the woman, does that character turn into him? Like, is it? I couldn't quite tell. It's like when they're spinning around, we cut back to them. Is it him, but he's in the makeup? I couldn't tell if that was the case.
Like the actual actor?
Yeah. When they were like,
I didn't look that closely. No.
I couldn't tell if that was the case or not, because the channeler, because we do keep cutting back to them telling the story. And I couldn't quite tell because they like do the big physical, like, oh, I'm being possessed thing. And I was like, my eye could not tell straight away, since this is my first time. There's so much to keep track of. I was like,
we'd have to double check, but I don't think so. I could be wrong. I wasn't paying close
because
enough
the makeup
attention.
is also so unified, because it's the same makeup that the wife has, obviously, because it's that style of the times and what women had to look like, and things like that, and like that look to it all. But yeah, it was the third one's like sad. Like, it's very sad because it's saying that no one's at fault here. The person who died was the one that killed themselves, and how do you react to that? Because you want there to be, as a viewer and them telling the stories, there to be a perpetrator. It's not satisfying. And I think that kind of really emphasizes the last story, where the last story is almost a rejection of the third story, where it's like, no, that's not good enough. We need to have it be like everyone's shitty. And everyone's at fault, and everyone did it, and it wasn't glorious. Like, it's a rejection of all the other stories. Like, no, it wasn't a magnificent, cool fight like the first story, and no, the wife wasn't a victim like in the second story, and no, well, the husband wasn't a sad guy, and everyone sucked. But it's not as childish as I'm saying it there. But it is. But that one, like the last one, I liked a lot because it had the most vile to it in a weird way. And it's like, why?
Yeah, the last story is being told by the woodcutter, which is one of the two people telling the whole story from the beginning to the commoner who's come over to the gate. And it's established that he hasn't told this story yet to the authorities. He was, as far as everyone else was aware, just the guy that found the body, but it turns out that he was actually witness to these same events that you've gotten the 3 versions of already. And yeah, he portrays everyone, like you said, in a negative light. The bandit is a lot more cowardly. The wife is a lot meaner. And the samurai is also not as noble, and also a little bit of a coward in a fight as well. And it's basically just building upon the whole, theme that we talked about already of like the darkness of man, people who tell lies. They even have a really good line about how the gate of Rashomon was once home to a powerful demon, but it fled in fear at the darkness of man who would lie to get their way or something like that. And you can kind of see, you get a twist after this tale about how the woodcutter himself had an angle in everything. How it builds upon how he's also being influenced by the darkness of man.
Yeah. And what's his angle?
His angle, so we mentioned before that there was the special dagger in all the stories. This is the only story where that dagger isn't mentioned. So if you want to discount everything from the first three let me start that again. If you want to pick apart the details of the first three stories, the things that you can be most confident in are the common aspects. The three of them were in this location. The man was tied up. The wife was very distraught at what happened to her, and there was some sort of, cultural moral about, woman has slept with two men and this, taints everything. And there was a knife present. You can take at least all of those things, as being truths. So the fact that this final story, which is presented by probably the most sympathetic character, which you would think like, okay, this is finally where we're getting the truth. It is missing one of those key details. And the commoner who's being told the story points out how, oh, you didn't even mention the knife, so that tells me that you pocketed it. And the way that the woodcutter responds is, oh no, you've realized the truth, that I did steal the knife. But it's not so much like a reveal that like, oh, I was the villain all along or anything like that. It's more played into the realization that, I have also committed a lie, distorted the truth. I am part of the darkness of humanity.
I'm a part of the problem.
Yeah.
There is no justice. There is no, truth be told at the end of this because we all distort the truth. But at the same time, the movie still has an optimistic kind of outlying at the end of it all. Like, the sun does return. There are things that go on. Life will continue. We can walk off together.
People who have committed dark acts can still commit acts of light.
Exactly. I really liked Rashomon. I thought it was, again, it sounds so obvious to say considering its status in cinema and storytelling, but this was a really great movie. I thought that it aged really nicely. I enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed the performances. I enjoyed the way that this was shot and composed, and the music, and what it leaves unsaid. When you read up on the trivia, a lot of it is obvious things that you would understand, but when you think of it in the time period it was made and the people making it, there's that piece about how the actors would come up to him and be like, it doesn't make sense. Why is this like this? It's like, well, that's life. That kind of life doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And it had that classic thing of like, oh, it was rejected by so many people on a pre-production level until it was finally accepted. And then it, rose to, cinema history.
Yeah. I would recommend Rashomon to those who have not watched it. Even if you've listened to this, there's still so much to experience with the movie, so much to garner from it, whether it is just the way that it tells its stories, those performances, those characters, or your interpretations of things, or if you're really wanting to look at how things were launched off in terms of those technicals and those ways that we film things and tell our stories, and the adversities of making stories as well, because you don't know it while you watch it, but when you look at it, you're like, wow, this was a hard film to make. As we said, from the pre-production, the production and post, like there's just a lot of things to get through, but that often happens, whether it is old or new, whether it is low budget or high, those things still remain problem solving. And I really liked Rashomon. I'm glad that you pitched this our way.
Yeah, I'm glad we finally got around to it. And even we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, but like obviously a lot of things, especially TV shows will have like, oh, the episode where they do like a Rashomon thing, and they're all fun takes on that. It is interesting that like this original product that did it, does end on like an open-ended thing. It doesn't always focus on like the comedy. It can be such a serious story. And yeah, even because it is such like a fun concept, it was interesting seeing the original version of it and how it hasn't really been fully imitated. I think I did read that there is a American remake with Paul Newman and someone else who's a big name.
Yeah, makes sense. They always try to do different versions of these, but anything else you want to mention about Rashomon?
Do we have any ideas about like what the truth could be?
I always feel like an annoying prick when I do this, but I don't care.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where it's like, it's so obvious to me that the movie doesn't want you to be focused on like, what the real truth. It wants you to engage with thinking about the implications of how we look at things and the biases and the darkness of man and all of those things that you've very much verbalized throughout it all, rather than like, I always think of John Carpenter with The Thing, where people are like, oh yeah, Childs at the end is the thing, and he's just like, shut the fuck up. That's not what it like.
I was going to bring up a film that we have done. I remember when we did In the Heat of the Night. That's a story that focuses all around a murder mystery, but the answer to the murder mystery like wasn't even that big a deal. When it's revealed who did it, it's like, okay, fine, but we've got other things going on.
Yeah, we've got other things to contend with. In that film, it's very much about the characters and the kind of socio-political stuff, while this one is very much about themes, but also just thinking about how one goes about dispensing truth and lies and fiction and non-fiction, and like how you spin a tale and
and even the
memories,
even the differences between like deliberate lies and lies that you've convinced yourself of.
Memories, they can lead you down certain paths as well. So you recommend, I recommend. Are you excited to check out more films by this director? Are there any of his that you're particularly interested in, because he's got a well-known catalog of work?
I don't know his full filmography. I know about Ran. I know he did Seven Samurai, right? Those are the ones that popped to my head immediately. But yeah, I'd be keen to check it out more. I've literally only seen one film, and I've seen it twice.
Yeah, he's
we do have something of his lying around at home, and I remember one of my brother's friends who's like a big film buff said like, oh, that's actually like a rare copy, like DVD copy of that. Maybe whatever that is.
Hidden Fortress, of course, and Yojimbo. Yeah, there's a lot there. Living. That's one that's well, Living. Living is a movie that came out recently that was like an adaptation of one of his ones called Iroku, and that's a really good film. But I want to talk about just lastly, I can't remember the name. This is Rashomon is an adaptation.
It's of two things.
Of two things. And one of them is, what's it called? Like On the Leaves or something? Or
I think
Along the Leaves.
One of them's like Rashomon, and the other one I think is like In the Grove.
Oh, In the Grove. Yeah. Because that was interesting because that is a recurring motif in each story as well. It's like this is all taking place in this grove and on the leaves, and there's this river alongside, or like this body of water, and so that's an interesting thing to think about. But
in a grove.
In a grove. There you go. In a grove. But it's my turn to recommend a film.
Oh,
and
sorry, just quickly, that the American film was The Outrage.
Oh, there you go.
Which has Paul Newman and William Shatner.
I love the Shatner. Okay, interesting. I think William Shatner did one of those what are your four favorite films? Like, I think it was Letterboxd. They had him on for, and it was him in a car because he was too busy, because he's William Shatner. He's always got something on. So he's driving he's in the back seat of a car, and he talks. I think he said Rashomon, and he talked about how he was in a film adaptation. So that makes sense.
It says that he plays the preacher, so I guess he's the priest equivalent.
There you go. But it's my turn to recommend a film for us to watch and discuss.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone make sure to give this a viewing for yourself. It's not just going to be Bartek and I, because I am going a bit more local. I am giving us an
Ooh.
Australian film. I'm giving us one that is an animated film.
Mm-hmm.
I am doing Mary and Max, which is from the same person, but this is the theatrical debut of Harvey Crumpet.
Okay, cool.
Do you remember Harvey Crumpet?
Yeah, Claymation. Really good film.
Yep. So
Short film.
they have this film, Mary and Max. It has a lot of Australian talent. And
Is it Claymation as well?
yes, it's the same style. You can very
Cool.
much tell it's the same person.
Yeah.
I've never seen this film. It's been on my watch list for ages. And a huge reason I'm recommending it too is they have a new film coming out this year.
Oh, cool.
So I'm very, very keen on giving it a view, and it's just been there. I've been always meaning to check it out. I really loved Harvey Crumpet. Everyone give that a watch. I may give it a rewatch in the meantime because I really liked it, but you don't have to. We're going to do Mary and Max. So make sure to give that a viewing, and we will be back next time to talk about it in more details. Bartek, where can people find us on the internet?
You can find us in a grove called the internet at websites such as Facebook, where Spit and Polish Presents is the page name, Twitter at Spit Polish Pre. Spit Polish Presents is the name of the account as well. You can contact us directly at spitandpolished@gmail.com. We've also got a YouTube channel. You can leave us a comment there. We get notifications about those. So, all of these places will be able to hear from you if you need to contact us.
You can recommend films to us. We add them to our list, whether they're new films, old films, as long as we are able to find a copy and watch them and that they're movies. We will add them to the list and do our best to get around and discuss them.
We'll certainly backlog them if we can't find them, but, actually getting around to doing them, that's the tricky part.
We have a few where we have to double check now because some of them were hard to find, but then sometimes you give it a month or two or a year or however long and they've come into easy finding. You're like, I can find this now.
On the Silver Globe.
That was
years.
one. And then it was on YouTube.
And then all of a sudden it's like, this is suddenly available.
It's available a lot. So sometimes it comes around. So let us know. All of this is in the description of our episode. So it's there for your convenience. Thank you all so much for listening. Bartek, great to be here talking to you yet again. At least that's my version of events.
Yeah. Now we have to record the second version of this episode.
Rachel's take, my wife's take.
You watched it with her, right?
Yes.
Yeah, there we go.
But what did she think?
Has she been listening in on this conversation the whole time? And, we can get, her version of what
she
really
doesn't
happened.
listen to the podcast, even when it's right next to her.